Welcome back to our channel. Beneath the polished veneer of wealth and control, a world of betrayal simmers, ready to erupt. In the heart of a family that prided itself on loyalty, secrets fester like poison, twisting love into obsession and trust into weapons. One night, a single act of passion shatters the fragile illusions, igniting a storm of rage, desire, and unthinkable consequences. Eyes meet, hearts falter, and the thin line between devotion and destruction disappears, revealing a truth so raw, so shocking, that nothing will ever be the same again. This is not merely a story of love and betrayal, it is a descent into the darkest corners of ambition, obsession, and human fragility, where every choice carries a price too high to imagine. Bill stood at the edge of the dimly lit corridor, his chest tightening with every heartbeat, as if the very rhythm of his body had turned traitorous. Before him, in the secluded sanctuary of Izaiah's private study, Hayley's silhouette pressed against his son's in an embrace that was both intimate and shocking in its boldness. The way her hands traced over his shoulders, the curve of her lips brushing against his, and the intensity of Izaiah's gaze as he returned her affection, it was as though every ounce of loyalty, trust, and moral order in Bill's world had been ripped apart in a single, cruel instant. He felt a surge of emotions that were both foreign and ancient as the cold, unyielding stone beneath his feet. Rage, disbelief, betrayal, sorrow, and a chilling, calculated fear. The sight made his vision tunnel. Colors dulled, sounds muted, until the only reality was the tableau before him. Every motion of Hayley's hand across Izaiah's back felt like a strike against his own chest. He wanted to scream, to shatter the fragile calm, but his body was paralyzed by the dual forces of shock and rage. Anger began to seep like molten metal through his veins, forging his limbs into instruments of retribution he barely recognized as his own. Yet beneath the blaze of fury lay a deeper, more unsettling emotion, a gnawing uncertainty, the introspective torment of a man questioning not just their actions, but his own judgment, his own failures as a father, as a man. The betrayal was compounded by layers of context he could not ignore. Hayley had been a constant, a figure of trust, a presence in his life that promised allegiance to the fragile equilibrium of family and authority he had fought decades to maintain. And yet, here she was, violating boundaries with a reckless abandon that seemed designed to humiliate him, to expose the very fractures he had long denied. Izaiah's own duplicity cut sharper, for it was not merely the act itself, but the awareness of it, the deliberate choice, the calculated crossing of invisible lines, that hinted at a mind emboldened by secrets and resentment. Bill's heart, usually a bastion of composure, became a battlefield where every instinct for protection, control, and dominance clashed violently with the paralyzing sorrow of personal inadequacy. He watched them, an unwilling observer trapped in the theater of their private rebellion. A cold, almost surgical clarity began to emerge from the fog of his wrath. Every instinct for action was tempered by an understanding that this was not a moment to act impulsively. The consequences could fracture more than bodies, they could annihilate the tenuous threads that held their family together, unravel the delicate lattice of trust, respect, and history that defined them. And yet the knowledge that restraint might be required only fueled the furnace inside him. His mind raced through possible scenarios, confrontations, revelations, threats, ultimatums. Each path seemed fraught with peril, each choice a potential trigger for destruction, yet every fiber of his being screamed for justice, for retaliation, for the assertion of authority he had so long wielded. Bill's gaze hardened, crystallized into something unyielding. His eyes, once warm and measured, now resembled shards of ice capable of freezing the air around them. Hayley and Izaiah continued in their embrace, blissfully unaware of the storm coiling behind the threshold. Every brush of her hand across him was a provocation, every tilt of his head a reminder of the vulnerability Bill had once tried to shield. The room, suffused with soft golden lamplight, became a crucible for his fury, transforming intimacy into weaponized offense, desire into evidence of treachery. In that moment, he realized that anger alone would not suffice. He needed strategy, precision, and an understanding of the human weaknesses before him. For Hayley, it was arrogance, for Izaiah, the intoxicating thrill of defiance. Both were exploitable. As minutes dragged into an unbearable eternity, Bill's body trembled with the restraint of violence unspent. Thoughts collided with emotions in a cacophony that threatened to shatter his sanity. Memories of past betrayals, minor deceptions, and overlooked slights coalesced into a narrative that justified the storm he felt brewing. He could see the patterns forming, the ways in which each actor had played their role in the slow collapse of his authority, and a dark sense of inevitability settled over him. He was at the edge of a precipice, caught between the ethical imperative to preserve what remained and the primal need to obliterate the transgressors before him. Suddenly, the sound of a misplaced object, a subtle shift of a chair leg on polished wood, snapped his awareness into hypervigilance. It was insignificant, yet monumental, for it reminded him that he was no longer merely a spectator. The room was a minefield, and his next movement could ignite a chain reaction of irreversible consequences. He clenched his fists, felt the sharp bite of fingernails into palms, and allowed himself to acknowledge the truth he had long resisted: the world he had meticulously constructed was unraveling not through external forces, but by the choices of those he trusted most. In that frozen instant, Bill's mind became a theater of calculation and fury. Every potential outcome played out in rapid succession: confrontation, exposure, retreat, manipulation. He considered the devastation that a single impulsive act might wreak, the irrevocable fractures in loyalty, the permanent staining of reputations, the destruction of bonds that had taken years to form. And yet, beneath this meticulous strategizing, a more primal voice whispered, revenge. It was not merely personal, it was existential, a reclamation of authority, control, and dignity eroded by the audacity of betrayal. As the embrace persisted, Bill felt a shift in the atmosphere itself, a subtle tension in the air that spoke of inevitabilities yet to unfold. The room, once a sanctuary of private indulgence, had become a crucible of power, emotion, and consequence. Every glance, every slight movement of muscle, every fleeting gesture became a vector for potential catastrophe. Bill's icy gaze met theirs, not in direct confrontation, but in silent promise. The reckoning was imminent, the consequences unavoidable, the fallout inescapable. In this suspended moment, all pretense of civility fell away. Bill was no longer the measured patriarch, the calm arbiter of family affairs. He was a tempest contained only by his intellect, a storm of righteous fury tempered by the calculation of its destructive potential. The betrayal he had witnessed was not just an affront to him, it was a declaration of war, a challenge to the very order he had fought to preserve. And deep within, he knew that once the first stone was cast, the architecture of their lives would crumble, revealing raw, unfiltered human nature in all its beauty, horror, and cruelty. Every heartbeat was a drum of impending conflict, every breath a reminder of the inevitability of confrontation. Bill could no longer ignore the fundamental truth: the world he knew had ended the moment Hayley and Izaiah chose each other over the fragile bonds of loyalty, trust, and familial obligation. What remained was the aftermath, and in that aftermath, Bill would either assert dominion or be consumed. The choice was his, but the consequences were universal. And in that charged silence, as the golden lamplight flickered across the polished surfaces, Bill made a decision. Not a decision to act rashly, nor a surrender to emotion, but a calculated embrace of inevitability. The storm would come. The world would witness the collision of intent, desire, and consequence. And in that moment of ultimate reckoning, nothing would remain untouched. The air was thick with the residue of confrontation, a suffocating tension that clung to every surface of the house. Bill's chest heaved, the fury that had simmered for hours now boiling into something tangible, almost unbearable. He could feel the weight of every choice pressing down on him, each one a potential spark for irrevocable destruction. Hayley and Izaiah remained unaware, or perhaps deliberately blind, to the storm that had taken form outside their intimate sanctuary. Every heartbeat seemed to echo the inevitability of the reckoning, and Bill knew that the world they had taken for granted was collapsing with every passing second. His gaze, cold and unyielding, swept across the room, noting the small details: the slight quiver of Hayley's hand as she adjusted her clothing, the tense set of Izaiah's jaw, the way they both carried themselves as though unaware of the consequences already set in motion. In another life, he might have pitied them. In another life, he might have sought reconciliation. But that life no longer existed. The betrayal was too deep, the fracture too complete. He felt a dark satisfaction in recognizing the truth. The universe had revealed their choices, and now they were trapped by their own desires, ensnared by the very actions they had thought hidden. Bill moved silently, a predator in his own domain. Every step was measured, deliberate, every thought a calculation of control and consequence. He could feel the coldness of the night creeping in through the windows, mixing with the icy clarity of his resolve. He understood, perhaps for the first time, the delicate balance between love and power, between loyalty and destruction. It was a balance that had been shattered by their hands, and now, only the raw and brutal honesty of consequence remained. As he reached the doorway, the finality of his decision settled over him like a cloak. There would be no mercy, no forgiveness offered freely. Every hidden truth, every whispered lie, every stolen glance of intimacy would surface, laid bare under the unflinching light of exposure. Hayley and Izaiah were no longer the architects of their own story, they were characters in a drama orchestrated by the inevitability of their choices and the relentless judgment of a man pushed beyond the limits of endurance. Time seemed to stretch, each second a drawn-out warning of what was to come. Bill's heart, once human, now seemed tempered by steel, a vessel of inevitability and fury. He could almost hear the echoes of the lives that would be altered, the relationships fractured, the innocence lost. And in that moment of quiet before the storm, he understood that there was no turning back. The acts committed, the passions indulged, the betrayals embraced, they had all led to this precise, catastrophic juncture. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he stepped forward. Not in haste, not in blind anger, but with the careful, cold precision of a man who understood that the consequences of a single night would ripple through the lives of all involved, leaving nothing untouched, no soul unscarred. The house, the family, the very bonds that had once seemed unbreakable, they would never be the same. And as the storm finally broke, the echoes of choices made in secrecy reverberated into a future carved from fire, ice, and the unrelenting force of a man who had seen betrayal in its most intimate form, and would respond with all the quiet, devastating power at his command.